What truly happens when loyalty collides with destiny on a tower high above the sleeping castle? The air bites with cold, torches flicker against stone, and somewhere in the dark, two minds sharpen like blades. You probably won't survive this, but you'll understand it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand before the outline of Barty Crouch Jr., the name that once fluttered through ministry corridors like a polite cough nobody wanted to acknowledge. His fall wasn't sudden. It was more of a long, awkward slide down the staircase of ambition, greased with betrayal and bad parenting. You watch him at the tower's edge, eyes like burnt glass, and you realize that in the grand timeline of wizarding scandals, this one has everything: deception, family drama, and hair that's been through more transformations than the average transfiguration lesson. Historically, the Ministry of Magic loved a good cover-up almost as much as a departmental tea break. That's not speculation, it's tradition. Even the Muggles had their own versions, from Cold War spies to soap opera plotlines that refused to die. One historian once called Crouch Jr.'s story the perfect British tragedy, too polite to scream, too repressed to stop. You can't help but chuckle softly. There's something tragically bureaucratic about the dark arts when they require forms in triplicate. But beneath that faint amusement lies something else, the whisper of inevitability, of a son trying to prove himself in a system built to swallow him whole. And as you lean closer to the torchlight, you sense the irony. The man who imitated others so perfectly was never allowed to be himself. You step back into the memory of the courtroom, where the chandeliers swing slightly as if even they are nervous to be here. The Wizengamot sits in a semicircle of judgmental hats, and at the center, young Barty Crouch Jr. shivers more from humiliation than fear. You can almost hear the collective rustle of self-righteous robes, a sound historians believe was the true anthem of the ministry in those days. It's the kind of trial where everyone pretends not to enjoy the drama, though someone definitely brought snacks. His father's voice cuts through the room, cold, polished, and proud, like a legal dagger sharpened for family use. And here's your first fun fact. Real medieval courts sometimes displayed criminals in iron cages for public shame, but the wizarding world went for the subtler version: public gossip and lifelong exile. Scholars still debate whether that made it any less cruel. The son begs, the father sentences, and the crowd nods approvingly, relieved that justice looks tidy when someone else's name is being ruined. You smirk. It's the magical equivalent of office politics, except with dementors. Somewhere in that echoing chamber, a mother's heart fractures quietly, her face pale beneath the torchlight. You might wonder how a boy who once collected chocolate frog cards ended up accused of serving the darkest wizard alive. It's like discovering the quiet kid in your study group was secretly plotting world domination, uncomfortable, but somehow predictable in hindsight. The record keepers wrote that he screamed his innocence until the cell door closed. Modern historians call it the earliest known case of cursed teenage rebellion. You almost want to laugh, but the joke sours fast because beneath the sarcasm sits something raw. A warning about what happens when love, fear, and ambition all try to occupy the same wand. As the gavel, or whatever the magical equivalent is, comes down, you can feel it too. The sentence wasn't just imprisonment, it was erasure. You wake into a different kind of prison, one disguised as freedom. The air tastes of damp wood and secrets as you realize you're no longer in Azkaban, but inside a manor where the walls know your name. Polyjuice potion bubbles quietly nearby, its scent halfway between boiled socks and regret. You've read the recipe before: hair, patience, and a complete disregard for dignity, and yet it's hard not to admire the audacity. Barty Crouch Jr., freshly disguised, becomes someone else entirely, and you wonder if every gulp of that potion tastes a little like self-erasure. Wizards might call it transformation, but psychologists, if they existed in this world, would probably label it identity burnout. You grin, it's both tragic and oddly relatable. A mainstream historical fact slips in. During the Middle Ages, nobles also relied on disguise, not through potion, but costume. They called it masquerade diplomacy, where kings wore masks to negotiate peace and flirt with the wrong queens. The line between deception and diplomacy, it turns out, has always been paper-thin, or in this case, potion-thick. You can't help laughing softly when you picture Barty rehearsing Mad-Eye Moody's growl in front of a mirror. Constant vigilance, he mutters, while secretly checking if his fake eye spins too fast. There's a strange tenderness in his mimicry, a boy pretending to be a man pretending to be sane. But this is where the story gets slippery. Scholars still argue whether he loved the power of the disguise or simply loved not being himself. That's the kind of question that keeps wizarding historians awake past curfew. Somewhere in that quiet, you find a fringe tidbit, a rumor that early versions of polyjuice could briefly merge personalities if brewed under a blood moon. It was said to make memories flicker, emotions blur, and boundaries dissolve. Imagine that. You play a role so well that your own reflection starts taking notes. You chuckle again. Maybe the biggest joke is that every disguise works until someone asks your real name. The potion settles. The eyes change. The tower fades. And you, like him, step into the dangerous freedom of being someone everyone trusts, except yourself. You slip quietly into a memory that smells of dust, candle wax, and unspoken desperation. The Crouch household at twilight. Here, love is a theory, discipline is a hobby, and secrets ferment in the corners like improperly bottled wine. Barty Crouch Jr. paces in polished boots while his wife, pale and trembling, watches him with a kind of loyalty only despair can produce. The scene feels like something out of a tragic opera, except there's no singing, just the slow brewing of a very bad plan. You've heard of family therapy, but this is more like alchemy gone wrong. The idea was simple enough. Swap the dying mother for the imprisoned son using polyjuice potion, smuggle him home, and keep him hidden forever. A domestic arrangement that makes basement renovations sound exciting. You can't help smirking at the sheer absurdity. Wizards might have mastered time travel, but emotional communication still eludes them. Historically, families have gone to wild lengths to protect their own. Marie Antoinette's mother once sent spies to make sure her daughter behaved politically after marriage, and scholars still argue if that was love or control wearing perfume. In the Crouch house, it's the same question: love or delusion? You lean closer, watching the mother sip the potion that will let her die in Azkaban under her son's face. It's a move so self-sacrificing it borders on performance art. A lesser-known tidbit claims that some early polyjuice variants could leave traces of emotional residue, meaning that even in death, her reflection might have wept through his mirror at home. Creepy, yes, but poetic if you squint. The years crawl by. She fades, he hides, and the father polishes his ministry badge to forget. You can almost hear the walls whisper, "We don't talk about that." And scholars, bless them, still debate whether Mrs. Crouch was a tragic hero or an enabler with excellent brewing skills. You sigh softly. Either way, it's the kind of family story that makes you grateful for awkward Sunday dinners. You open your eyes to the sound of a clunking wooden leg and the faint hum of paranoia disguised as pedagogy. Hogwarts is alive again. The walls gossip, the portraits pretend not to, and somewhere in the Great Hall, pumpkin juice tries to pass as breakfast. You, or rather Barty as Moody, march through the corridors with an intensity that makes even Peeves pause mid-prank. It's the year of what historians later dubbed Moody Madness, a term coined in jest by a Daily Prophet intern who accidentally spelled modesty. The real Moody is locked away somewhere, probably dreaming about paperwork, while his imposter teaches defense against the dark arts with more enthusiasm than caffeine and less sleep than a fifth year before exams. You find yourself oddly impressed. Barty Jr. may be mad, but he's method. He creates lessons with explosions, dramatic pauses, and occasional educational trauma. Students talk about him in hushed admiration, unaware that the man preaching vigilance is the very threat they're being warned against. It's poetic irony with extra homework. You stifle a chuckle because honestly, who hasn't exaggerated a resume during a job interview? The historical comparison drifts in naturally. Ancient Rome had its own masters of disguise too. Generals who dressed as commoners to spy on morale, and emperors who mingled in taverns to hear the truth. Scholars still debate whether it ever worked, or if the citizens just politely pretended not to notice their emperor wearing sandals made of gold. Similarly, Barty's imitation of Moody feels both brilliant and ridiculous. He mimics the limp, the growl, even the habit of spinning that magical eye so unpredictably that it once made a Hufflepuff cry. Somewhere between the lessons on unforgivable curses and practical dueling drills, you realize the cruel humor of it all. He's the best teacher Hogwarts ever had about the dark arts, precisely because he believes in them. A sly grin crosses your face. You can't help thinking that the educational board would have approved the curriculum had they survived the inspection. But this charade is exhausting. Polyjuice is an hourly reminder that the truth demands constant maintenance. Every swallow tastes a little more bitter, a little more like guilt with a cinnamon aftertaste. You sense his mind unraveling, thread by thread, as he tries to live up to the image of the man he's stolen. It's not easy pretending to be mad when you already are. A faint joke escapes you. Teaching at Hogwarts seems to drive everyone insane eventually. He just started ahead of schedule. Still, there's an odd grace in his routine. He cares for the students in his own twisted way, warning them against dark power even as it hums beneath his skin. When Hermione raises her hand, he smirks with the kind of pride that only a man living two lies can muster. You almost believe he believes it himself. A curious historical tidbit slides in here. During the Renaissance, some alchemists used disguise and pseudonyms to hide from persecution. Paracelsus once claimed to have used 7 names just to publish one book. It's said that after years of pretending, he forgot which name felt real. Barty isn't far from that fate. Each lesson chips away at his sanity like chalk on a blackboard, carving grooves of paranoia so deep that even the portraits begin to sense it. He's playing a role too well written to escape. One night, while the students sleep and the castle breathes, he sits in Moody's office, polishing the hip flask. His reflection ripples. For a moment, he doesn't see Moody at all, just a tired boy whose mother died for a plan that should never have worked. The fire crackles like a confession he'll never make. You watch him tighten his grip on the wand, the face twitching, the mask shifting. It's terrifying and tragic, like watching a portrait slowly forget who it was painted to be. And yet, amidst the madness, there are flickers of humor that refuse to die. He secretly grades essays with snarky remarks. Decent effort, but your cursed deflection lacks style. He laughs too loudly at his own jokes about constant vigilance, almost daring someone to notice. Even Dumbledore, the closest thing this castle has to omniscience, seems content to let the farce continue. Maybe he suspects and waits. Or maybe he enjoys the chaos just enough to let the story unfold naturally. Scholars still debate that one, of course. Was Dumbledore aware all along, or did he simply trust his own instincts too much? The discussion appears in academic papers under titles like Leadership and Lethargy in Magical Pedagogy, a Case Study. The longer the masquerade continues, the thinner the walls between teacher and imposter become. You can feel it now. Every spell he casts, every lecture he delivers, draws him deeper into the labyrinth of his own creation. When he watches Harry Potter practice disarming spells, there's something almost paternal in his stare, an echo of protection twisted by obsession. He's grooming the perfect moment, waiting for the Triwizard Tournament to bloom into chaos. And yet, some part of him enjoys the peace of routine, the sound of chalk, the rhythm of applause, the illusion of belonging. You find yourself thinking that this might have been the happiest year of his life, which is both funny and deeply sad. A random scholarly footnote crosses your mind. In certain psychological theories, long-term impersonation can blur self-identity, leading the actor to subconsciously adopt traits of the persona. Historians of wizarding behavior still argue if polyjuice amplifies that effect. Does the potion copy only the body or whisper to the mind as well? It's an uncomfortable question, one that leaves philosophers arguing over teacups. Perhaps Barty's tragedy lies in this. He became the man he hated, only to realize he was better at being someone else than being himself. You lean back, hearing the faint echo of laughter from the great hall, the soft clatter of forks and youthful dreams. For a fleeting second, you almost forget this is a story of downfall. The castle seems calm, the sky heavy with snow, and in the staff room, Moody dozes in a chair, twitching between two lives. Tomorrow, he'll terrify more students, polish more lessons, and slip another dose of truth-flavored potion down his throat. It's a loop both comforting and cruel. You smile wryly. Every teacher has their own way of coping. His just happens to involve felonies. And as the torches fade, you realize that in pretending to protect others from darkness, he's teaching them the most honest lesson of all, that evil doesn't always arrive roaring. Sometimes it limps, grins, and grades your homework. You find yourself in the classroom again, where even the dust motes seem nervous. The desks are arranged like soldiers expecting battle, parchment rustles like whispered prayers, and Professor Moody paces the floor with the grace of a storm disguised as a lesson plan. You sit close enough to feel the hum of tension radiating off him, the faint metallic click of his leg echoing against the flagstones. "Constant vigilance," he growls, and half the class jolts as if he'd cast it as a spell. In truth, it might as well be one, his mantra, his cover, his curse. The students don't realize it yet, but this isn't a lesson about dark arts. It's a lecture on how to hide one's madness in plain sight. You almost want to applaud the performance. It's not easy being the villain and the favorite teacher in the same semester. Every lesson is a masterpiece of controlled chaos. He turns unforgivable curses into an educational demonstration, a sort of moral theater complete with audience participation and traumatized applause. "This is what real evil looks like," he tells them, while internally thinking, and you're looking right at it. You can't decide whether that's poetic irony or just poor classroom management. Still, the students love him. Even Hermione, who's suspicious of everything, takes notes like she's decoding prophecy. You grin softly. There's something deliciously absurd about a Death Eater grading essays on ethical spell use. The humor bites in small doses, like realizing your favorite substitute teacher has an underground lair. Historically, educators have always flirted with darkness. In the 17th century, Jesuit scholars reportedly taught exorcism theory alongside Latin grammar, proof that academia has never been allergic to melodrama. The same energy lingers here. Books float, quills tremble, and somewhere behind Moody's scarred face, Barty Jr. is thriving in the only honest role he's ever played, a fraud teaching authenticity. A quirky, fringe tidbit floats to mind. Early wizards once believed that teaching dark spells under moonlight amplified moral resistance. Hogwarts never tried that, but given how much candlelight this classroom burns through, it's a wonder no one summoned a ghostly PTA. Yet beneath the jokes, something starts to unravel. The polyjuice tastes off. His reflection twitches a fraction too slow. The laughter from the students feels like echoes from a life he'll never have. He begins keeping journals, not as Moody, but as himself. Tiny, cramped scrawls between lessons, reminders that he once had a name not borrowed from someone else's bones. You can sense the cracks widening, his smile becoming too sharp, his jokes too frequent. He calls Neville a good lad one day and a hopeless herbivore the next. There's a rhythm of instability pulsing in his voice, a beat scholars still argue about. Some claim it's guilt. Others call it brilliance under strain. The rest, predictably, file paperwork and pretend not to notice. Still, there's a strange affection growing between him and the students. They trust him in the way only the naive can trust a ticking clock. They know it measures danger, but still find comfort in the sound. Harry, especially, absorbs every word, watching the fake Moody with that stubborn, unblinking faith reserved for people destined to be disappointed. You can't help thinking that this relationship is the most human thing Barty Jr. ever had. He warns Harry about the tournament, encourages him to think strategically, even risks exposure to guide him subtly toward victory. Scholars still debate why. Was it part of the plan, or a flicker of real empathy seeping through the disguise? One historian called it the psychological hiccup of evil, a moment where villainy accidentally acts like mentorship. You smile faintly. That sounds about right. The castle itself begins to notice. The suits of armor hum uneasily when he passes. The portraits whisper about inconsistencies. One swears his eye rotated counterclockwise last Tuesday. Another claims he forgot to limp. Hogwarts, a place practically built on gossip and ghosts, starts piecing the puzzle together faster than Dumbledore. But still, the masquerade holds. Every successful lie, after all, depends on the truth it imitates. The truth here? Moody was always a bit unhinged. Barty just had to lean into the method acting. There's your third light joke. Imagine taking over someone's life only to find that their reputation for eccentricity makes your job easier. Even the ghosts probably shrugged and said, "Checks out." A historical parallel flickers through your mind. Napoleon once disguised himself as an ordinary soldier to hear what troops said about him, only to be mobbed by admirers. Pretending to be yourself, pretending to be someone else, the oldest trap in leadership and espionage alike. It's easy to forget which mask you put on first. That's exactly where Barty begins to drown. The nights grow longer, the potion less forgiving. His hands tremble as he marks papers. His laughter echoes oddly in the corridors. By spring, he's lost in a haze of sleepless brilliance, half convinced that the real Moody is the imposter. You can't help but laugh softly. It's like watching an actor refuse to leave the stage after the play has ended. But the Triwizard Tournament looms, dragging him toward the breaking point. Each task he orchestrates tightens the noose he tied himself. Behind every challenge, dragons, mermaids, mazes, there's his invisible hand, guiding Harry like a chess piece toward the final square. It's elaborate, cruel, and absurdly theatrical, exactly what you'd expect from a man raised by bureaucracy and tragedy. The irony tastes rich. He's supposed to serve Voldemort, yet spends months teaching the boy who will destroy him how to survive. Scholars still debate whether that counts as devotion or accidental redemption. The consensus? It's complicated. As summer approaches, the tension in the air thickens. Even the staircases seem to shift suspiciously. Barty's paranoia becomes tangible. Every shadow looks like a ministry inspector. Every student whisper feels like exposure. You notice him muttering to himself, pacing long after midnight, occasionally smiling at nothing. A lesser man would break. He, however, performs. The final exam season arrives. Essays pile up, polyjuice supplies dwindle. You can almost taste the ending approaching, bitter and inevitable. He takes one last walk through the castle corridors, brushing his hand against the stone like it's an old friend. Maybe, just maybe, this place became home. And isn't that the cruelest part of the story? The villain finally finds comfort, just in time to lose it. There's one last humorous flicker before the storm. He nearly assigns homework on how to spot imposters, but even he finds that too ironic to bear. Instead, he ends class early, letting the students leave laughing and carefree. For a few minutes, he sits alone at the desk, surrounded by parchment and silence. The polyjuice wears thin. The reflection in the flask blurs between faces. And though he doesn't know it yet, this is his final calm. The still breath before the maze, before discovery, before fall. You sit there too, listening to the castle breathe, the torches flicker, the echo of constant vigilance fading like a lullaby. If tragedy could smile, it would look exactly like this. You step into the night of the third task, where the sky itself seems to hold its breath and the Triwizard maze yawns open like a beast awaiting confession. The hedges tower high, breathing faint mist, and the air smells of tension and singed bravery. You can almost taste the nerves, the excitement, and the faint aroma of magical fertilizer. It's all part of Barty's orchestration. Every obstacle placed like a musical note in a dark symphony only he can hear. You glide through the corridors of the maze beside Harry, feeling that strange tug of destiny, though you, of course, know the stagehand behind the curtain. Somewhere beyond the cheering crowd, Professor Moody watches through that spinning eye, every flicker of light reflected like a pulse of control. For a man who once had none, control has become his narcotic. And tonight, he's overdosing. You almost pity him, in the same way you pity a man who builds a guillotine and then stands under it to admire the craftsmanship. The hedges close in, spells flash like lightning. Somewhere, a scream echoes, brief, sharp, quickly swallowed by the leaves. The maze becomes a metaphor, obviously, because scholars love that sort of thing. They still debate whether the structure represented fate, manipulation, or simply bad ministry landscaping. You smile at the thought. Even tragedy gets peer-reviewed eventually. Harry runs forward, Cedric follows, and fate tightens its grip. The Triwizard Cup glows faintly ahead, an ordinary object dressed up as destiny. You want to shout, to warn, but you know this story only moves in one direction. That's the trouble with bedtime history. You can't change the ending, only understand it better. And so, the portkey ignites, light swallows the maze, and with it, Barty's careful plan comes alive. In that instant, all his months of deception, all his midnight paranoia and overachieving lesson plans, deliver the boy who lived into the hands of the resurrected Dark Lord. You pause for a beat. This is the part where every good bedtime story leans close and whispers, and this is where everything went wrong. Because it does. The spell goes off perfectly, but fate, ever the practical joker, forgets to update the schedule. Harry survives. Cedric doesn't. Voldemort returns, yes, but so does the truth. And like all inconvenient truths, it arrives before the paperwork is ready. Back at Hogwarts, the chaos begins quietly. A portkey, a scream, a body. You watch Dumbledore's face stiffen, not fear exactly, but the unmistakable look of a man whose calendar just filled itself with problems. The crowd surges, whispers multiply, and within minutes, the school turns from sanctuary to scene of inquiry. And somewhere above it all, Moody, your Moody, the false one, panics for the first time. Because control, his one comfort, is slipping away faster than a loose screw in a broomstick factory. A historical note fits neatly here. In medieval tournaments, knights often faced labyrinth games to prove both strength and wit. Failure rarely killed them, but humiliation often did. Barty's version takes that old sport and dials it to existential. And here comes the irony. His own maze closes in, invisible but suffocating. He returns to his office, pacing in tight circles, mumbling calculations like a man trying to convince the universe of its own logic. He's taught his students all year that vigilance is salvation, and now he realizes it's just another word for exhaustion. You can't help chuckling softly. Maybe the curse of all good teachers is being undone by their own lesson plan. Harry appears at the door, disoriented, bleeding, clutching a wand that still hums with someone else's death. You can see Barty's hands tremble, half triumph, half dread. He pulls the boy inside, the performance barely intact, the polyjuice thinning around the edges like old paint. For a moment, he tries to recover the rhythm, the calm authority, the gravelly tone, the reassurance. But lies have expiration dates, and this one just hit its shelf life. "It's all right, Potter," he says, but the words wobble like a staircase with missing steps. And when Dumbledore storms in seconds later, the illusion crumbles completely. You almost admire how long it lasted. Some actors don't get that many curtain calls. They drag him to the chair, the real Moody discovered in the trunk, a grotesque nesting doll of imprisonment. The students whisper, the professors stare, and Dumbledore's voice slices through the air like cold light. The Veritaserum gleams. 3 drops. Truth, for once, doesn't need a translator. What spills out next is a confession equal parts brilliance, madness, and absurdity. You sit there listening, half horrified, half fascinated, as he tells his tale. The mother's sacrifice, the polyjuice, the plan, the maze, the cup. It's like watching someone unwrap their soul and realize it came pre-broken. The truth, as always, is less glorious than the rumor. You can't help but laugh under your breath. He planned everything except what to do afterward. There's a peculiar sadness to it, though, like finding the diary of a genius who built his own prison and then complained about the lighting. Barty speaks with conviction, even pride. He calls himself the faithful servant, yet his tone carries the weary rhythm of someone who knows the faith was one-sided. Voldemort's rise meant nothing now. His reward was the empty echo of purpose fulfilled too soon. You think of all the historical figures who served tyrants and later wrote about misunderstandings. The Byzantines called it Symmachia, the alliance of convenience that aged into regret. The wizarding world simply calls it Tuesday. A lesser-known tidbit surfaces in your mind. During the late Victorian era, spiritualists claimed to channel the voices of condemned souls through enchanted mirrors. One alleged message read, "I am sorry, but it made sense at the time. It fits perfectly here." As Barty rants, eyes wide and gleaming, you feel that same haunting apology vibrating beneath the madness. "I did it for him," he says, but you suspect the him changed meaning long ago. Perhaps it's not Voldemort he's talking about anymore. It's his father, his past, his fractured reflection in every mirror he's ever avoided. The scholars, naturally, have turned this confession into a buffet of theories. Was he brainwashed? Traumatized? A product of pure ideology or poor parenting? The debates fill entire symposiums where professors argue over teacups and PowerPoint spells. Yet none of them quite capture the look on his face, the strange relief of finally being seen, even as it kills him. You watch his lips twitch into something almost like a smile as the truth serum burns through the last of his lies. It's not joy, it's recognition. The game is over, and for the first time in years, he doesn't have to play. And then comes the calm after confession, that eerie silence that feels heavier than any outburst. Dumbledore looks tired, McGonagall furious, Snape vaguely insulted that someone else managed a better infiltration. The Ministry will arrive soon, full of paperwork and selective memory. The night air through the broken window smells like rain and retribution. Barty slumps in his chair, the polyjuice fully gone, his own face back in place, pale, haunted, and almost peaceful. You notice something strange. For a man obsessed with control, he finally seems at ease once he's lost it. You whisper to yourself that irony truly is the most powerful magic of all. Outside, the castle exhales. The students sleep uneasily, unaware that history has shifted under their pillows. Inside, truth flickers in torchlight like a candle fighting the dawn. You sit with him in that quiet, the kind that only follows catastrophe. And though you know the story will continue, though punishment and consequence are yet to come, you can't shake the feeling that this moment of raw, imperfect humanity is the real climax. The fall of Barty Crouch Jr. isn't when he's caught, it's when he realizes he was never free to begin with. The rest, as every historian and bedtime storyteller will tell you, is just paperwork. You descend into the chamber where the Ministry stores its forgotten truths, a place that smells faintly of parchment, dust, and guilt that's been alphabetized. Somewhere behind enchanted locks sits Barty Crouch Jr., not the manic imposter anymore, just a man in a chair, pale and hollow, staring at the wall as though it might blink back. The torches flicker with bureaucratic precision, each flame monitored, timed, and possibly invoiced. You stand there quietly, observing the final act of a story that's no longer being told. Outside, the official narrative is neat. A criminal captured, justice served, the Ministry victorious. Inside, the truth is cluttered, unfinished, and inconvenient, like an essay missing its conclusion because no one dared to write it. You can't help smiling wryly. History has always been better at endings than honesty. The guards whisper about him, the mad one, the pretender. the son who killed his own blood. Each description technically accurate and emotionally lazy. You lean against the wall, wondering what kind of peace a man finds after unmasking himself so completely. He doesn't move much now, except to sip water or mutter phrases that sound suspiciously like lesson plans. Constant vigilance, he murmurs sometimes, and one guard reportedly jumped so hard he resigned the next day. You laugh softly. Irony refuses to retire, even in captivity. Historians later noted that Barty's confinement was an early example of containment without trial, a method that became disturbingly common during crises. You recall that medieval inquisitors did the same thing. If the accused stopped screaming, it was taken as proof the system worked. Progress, it seems, mostly involves better lighting. Dumbledore visits once more. You follow him in the shadows, though it feels intrusive to watch two ghosts speak through living skin. The old wizard looks like winter personified, composed but frayed at the edges. "Why?" he asks, though he already knows the answer. Barty laughs, a sound so brittle it might shatter the torches. "Because I could," he says, then adds softly, "because he made me." It's never clear whether he means Voldemort or his father, and maybe it doesn't matter. Scholars still debate that line as if it were scripture, dividing themselves into camps, one arguing for indoctrination, another for pathology, and a third suggesting he simply enjoyed chaos. The debates filled dissertations, footnotes, and ministry-sponsored symposiums that mostly serve better snacks than insight. You chuckle. Academia loves villains because they never sue. A small, odd fact filters through your mind. Early magical prisons were said to be alive, sentient dungeons that absorbed the emotions of their captives. Over time, they became haunted, echoing laughter and sorrow in equal measure. Listening closely, you swear you hear something similar now, like the walls sigh each time he speaks. Maybe that's imagination, or maybe guilt has acoustics. Barty begins humming, low and tuneless, and you recognize the rhythm. It's the same cadence he used when pacing before class. Even now, in silence, he teaches himself how to remember being human. The ministry's interrogators arrive in pairs, wearing identical expressions of moral hygiene. They ask for details about Voldemort's return, but he only gives them poetry, metaphors about serpents, loyalty, and fire that forgets its source. They write it all down dutifully, missing the point entirely. You grin to yourself. Bureaucracy can drain even apocalypse of drama. Later, a clerk files the transcript under unverified magical delirium. That's what history does best, reduce confession to classification. Meanwhile, word of his capture ripples through the wizarding world like a polite panic. Some celebrate, others mutter that the ministry handled it poorly, they're not wrong, and a few quietly suspect that the story isn't over. You remember a medieval chronicler once wrote, "The condemned speak longer than the saints." That feels true here. Barty's story doesn't end. It reverberates. In taverns, students whisper about the fake professor who fooled Dumbledore, as if deceit were a sport and he the undefeated champion. In classrooms, nervous teachers forbid jokes about Polyjuice for a semester. And in one small cottage, a retired Auror, Mad-Eye Moody himself, sits polishing his flask and muttering, "Could have happened to anyone." You laugh again, softly this time. The entire world coping through denial feels oddly comforting. But the ministry, ever fond of closure, decides to tidy up the loose ends. They draft a statement, schedule a hearing, and assign a team of obliviators to handle the press leaks. Somewhere in the process, someone suggests humane termination. No one objects loudly enough to stop it. A week later, Barty Crouch Jr. dies quietly in his cell, though whether by curse or exhaustion depends on which memo you believe. The official record reads, "Magical trauma consistent with long-term instability," which is bureaucratic poetry for "we didn't want witnesses." You sigh. It's a predictable ending, but still the wrong kind. When the news reaches Hogwarts, the response is a collective shrug followed by an extra dessert at dinner. Tragedy fades faster than pudding. Only Dumbledore seems affected, standing by the window as storm clouds roll over the lake. "We've lost more than a man," he murmurs to no one in particular. "We've lost the memory of how we got here." That line later appears in 3 biographies and 6 inspirational calendars. Scholars still debate what he meant, but you think it's obvious. Institutions forget faster than people do. There's a peculiar comfort in examining the aftermath. Time doesn't heal. It edits. Within a month, the narrative is settled. The ministry saved Hogwarts, the system worked, and nothing remotely dangerous remains. You can practically hear the quills scratching that version of history into textbooks already. A century from now, Barty Crouch Jr. will be a footnote. Death Eater, impersonator, convicted criminal. No mention of the boy, the guilt, the genius, the humor. History trims emotion the way editors trim adjectives, ruthlessly, for clarity. You find one scholar's paper tucked away in the archives, written decades later, titled "The Pedagogy of Deceit, Barty Crouch Jr. and the Paradox of Vigilance." It argues that his teaching methods, though rooted in deception, may have produced Hogwarts' most vigilant generation. You smirk. It's the kind of posthumous compliment that feels like a cosmic prank. Still, it's not entirely wrong. His students survived later wars with sharper instincts, and some even admitted that Mad Eye's lessons saved their lives. If irony were currency, this man would have died a millionaire. A random fringe tidbit flickers into memory. During the Enlightenment, some philosophers claimed that evil was merely excessive logic applied without empathy. That fits perfectly here. Barty wasn't irrational. He was too rational, slicing morality into equations until there was nothing left but justification. It's an uncomfortable mirror, the kind you don't linger on unless you enjoy losing sleep. You lean closer to the page, feeling the whisper of history breathing behind your neck. Perhaps every era needs its Barty Crouch Jr., someone to remind us that intellect without mercy is just cruelty in formal wear. And yet, there's still something almost tender about him in retrospect. His last written note, preserved by a clerk who liked gossip, reads simply, "Tell them I wanted to matter." That line sticks with you longer than you expect. Maybe that's what all villains want. Not chaos, not power, but validation twisted beyond repair. It's both tragic and deeply human. You chuckle softly, because the joke lands even here at the end. He finally mattered, just not the way he intended. As the candle burns low and the chamber fills with quiet, you realize that his story has already begun to fade into myth. The ministry will sanitize, the public will forget, and Hogwarts will continue teaching children how to duel politely. But stories, inconveniently, have a way of lingering. Somewhere out there, someone still whispers his name over butterbeer, half in fear, half in fascination. And that, you think, might be the closest thing he ever gets to immortality. You walk the corridors of Hogwarts in the weeks after everything, when the air has that washed-out stillness that only follows catastrophe. The banners hang limp, the candles burn shorter, and the portraits have finally stopped pretending they didn't see anything. It feels like the castle itself has exhaled, a slow, relieved breath that smells faintly of ink, dust, and apology. The great drama has ended, the villains are gone, and yet the silence feels heavier than the noise ever did. You find yourself pausing by the classroom once ruled by the man who wasn't who he said he was. The door creaks open as though remembering him, and inside everything is precisely as he left it. The flask, the chalk, even the faint trace of burnt ozone from over-enthusiastic spellwork. It's eerie, like walking into a memory that hasn't realized it's over. The students move on first, as they always do. Youth metabolizes trauma like sugar, quickly and loudly. They swap stories, exaggerate details, and turn fear into folklore before breakfast. You overhear them laughing about Mad Eye's surprise pop quizzes and arguing whether he really could see through walls. It's part coping, part canon building. A few even start a small, constant vigilance club, though the motto has been rebranded into something cheerful, like stay ready for anything, even exams. You can't help grinning, Humans have an incredible talent for repurposing warnings into slogans. Historically, it's how every civilization survived its mistakes long enough to repeat them. The professors take longer. McGonagall keeps her voice softer in class. Snape's sarcasm sounds a little more tired. Even Filch polishes fewer doorknobs. Dumbledore, meanwhile, grows more distant, as if his thoughts have already stepped into the next crisis waiting politely off stage. There's a rumor he visits the hospital wing at night, checking on Harry while pretending to discuss tea varieties with Madame Pomfrey. Scholars will later call this the period of measured melancholy. Those students just remember that year's Christmas feast being unusually quiet. A historian once compared it to the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, everyone alive technically, but slightly less willing to dance. Beyond the castle, the wizarding world hums with half-believed stories. The prophet alternates between reassurance and gossip, running headlines like "Ministry ensures safety, students enjoy pudding," beside op-eds warning that darkness never truly dies. The same contradiction that fuels all post-crisis societies, the need to feel both safe and entertained. A quirky fringe tidbit from Muggle history fits perfectly here. After the Great Fire of London, merchants sold authentic ash as souvenirs within a week. You laugh softly. Grief apparently has a business model. Still, beneath the laughter and the headlines, there's that peculiar ache that comes when the world resumes too soon. You feel it in the hallways at dusk, in the way the torches hesitate before lighting themselves. The ghosts whisper less now, as if bored by closure, but sometimes one drifts through muttering about the teacher with the spinning eye. Maybe they miss the chaos. Maybe everyone does, a little. Comfort, after all, is unnerving when you've spent a year expecting explosions. In one of your evening wanderings, you find yourself at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The moon hangs low, pale as parchment. You half expect to see the Elder Crouch wandering between trees, still searching for forgiveness that no spell can conjure. Instead, there's only quiet, the kind that presses against your ears until it sounds like thought. You realize that every tragedy eventually becomes scenery. A century from now, the trees will still whisper, the students will still sneak out for forbidden snacks, and the Crouch name will live only in exam essays graded with mild boredom. It's both sad and soothing. Back inside, the great hall glows with soft golden light. Dinner chatter hums like a lullaby of normalcy. You sit at the back, invisible, watching the younger students laugh too hard and the older ones eat too little. Hermione debates house elf rights with her usual moral fire. Ron sneaks extra dessert, and Harry sits quietly, staring into the flames. You catch that look, the one that says he's already carrying a story no one else can read. You smile faintly. Heroes and villains, you think, are simply the same souls at different plot points. Scholars will later argue that this was the moment history pivoted toward prophecy again, but you prefer to see it as what it really is: exhaustion dressed as maturity. Dumbledore rises to speak. His voice fills the hall, calm but threaded with that melancholy music only leaders acquire after too many funerals. He talks of resilience, of lessons learned, of vigilance without fear. It's eloquent, of course, it always is, but you sense the fatigue underneath. You've seen this performance before in every age, the victory speech that doubles as a eulogy. The hall applauds politely, and the noise echoes up to the enchanted ceiling where stars flicker indifferently. You chuckle quietly. Even the cosmos seems too tired to care tonight. After the feast, you wander the corridors one last time. The portraits nod in drowsy solidarity. Somewhere, a music box plays faintly, a leftover from the Yule Ball, perhaps. The melody winds through the air like memory refusing to die. You pause outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, half expecting the door to open on its own. It doesn't, of course, but you feel the weight of invisible footsteps, his footsteps echoing through the stones. The irony isn't lost on you. For all his crimes, Barty taught them more about evil than any pure-hearted professor ever could. That uncomfortable truth will never make it into the curriculum, but it lingers nonetheless. A mainstream historical fact slips neatly into place here. After major wars, societies often rename the streets that witnessed bloodshed, an act of collective denial masquerading as healing. The wizarding world is no different. Within months, the ministry issues new guidelines for educational security, and the Crouch incident becomes a sanitized case study in magical ethics textbooks. It's summarized in exactly 8 lines. You laugh out loud at the brevity. Nothing says closure like concise formatting. Scholars still debate whether this erasure was mercy or cowardice. You suspect it's both. The seasons turn. Snow melts from the castle roofs. Owls resume their nightly postal ballet. The world, remarkably, refuses to end. That's the secret, you think. The true magic isn't resurrection or prophecy, but ordinary persistence. The ability to keep moving, even with the echo of catastrophe tucked neatly into your pocket. The human heart, magical or not, runs on selective memory. You breathe in the quiet, letting it settle into your bones like a spell meant for peace. By midsummer, the castle is empty again. The portraits nap in long daylight, the classrooms wait patiently, and the great lake mirrors the sky so perfectly it seems to forget everything that's ever fallen into it. You sit by the water, tracing ripples with your finger, and wonder what Barty would have seen here had he ever paused long enough to look. Maybe he would have laughed, maybe not. Either way, his story has folded into the landscape, a caution whispered beneath the songs of frogs and the rustle of willow leaves. You let the final image linger, torches dimming, parchment curling, the castle humming in sleep. The war hasn't begun yet, not truly, but you can feel its breath on the horizon. Still, for tonight, there's peace. Fragile, temporary, human peace. The kind that belongs to quiet corridors and distant thunder. You smile as the scene fades into darkness, voice soft enough to carry into dreams. Even the darkest lesson once learned becomes light. You wake into a morning of headlines, quills, and self-congratulation. The Ministry of Magic, that grand theater of moral bureaucracy, hums like a hive of busy denial. You walk its marble corridors and immediately feel the temperature difference between truth and policy. Truth is cold. Policy is comfortably lukewarm. A new banner stretches across the atrium. Rebuilding trust through transparency. You almost laugh aloud. Wizards could bottle irony and sell it as potion. It's been only a few weeks since Barty Crouch Jr. died in his cell, and yet the machinery of reputation has already sprung into action. Committees are formed, subcommittees are announced to oversee the committees, and within a fortnight no one can quite remember what the original question was. You lean against a golden statue and watch history being edited in real time. Inside the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a task force debates how to present the Crouch incident to the public. Their voices carry through half-open doors. We must highlight resilience, one says. Avoid words like cover-up, negligence, or massive systemic failure, adds another. A third suggests inventing a medal for Crouch Sr. posthumously, on the grounds that nothing softens scandal like an award. You chuckle softly. This is how civilizations cope, with ceremony, stationery, and very firm-sounding titles. The final report, drafted on 22 scrolls of enchanted parchment, concludes that all actions were taken in good faith and in the interest of public safety. It's a masterpiece of self-forgiveness. Scholars will one day cite it as an example of institutional gaslighting, so pure it could be bottled as an educational aid. The press plays its role obediently. The Daily Prophet prints a series titled Lessons Learned, The New Era of Security. The first article features Cornelius Fudge smiling beside a portrait of himself, an image historians later describe as the purest expression of magical delusion since Gilderoy Lockhart's memoirs. Citizens read the news, shake their heads in relief, and return to their teacups. The world prefers endings that rhyme with reassurance. A fringe tidbit surfaces in your memory. After the Salem witch trials, some towns printed apology pamphlets, but still kept the gallows standing for historical purposes. The ministry seems to have adopted the same logic. Repent publicly, repeat privately. You wander through the ministry archives, where the real story is being quietly boxed and mislabeled. Files stamped confidential stack in corners. An intern copies Barty's confession for internal use only, her expression hovering between boredom and unease. Should I file this under dark wizardry or education? She asks. Her supervisor doesn't look up. Whichever makes the statistics look better. You grin. It's the small bureaucratic choices that truly shape history. Somewhere between the filing cabinets lies the truth, rolled up neatly like a sleeping snake. Meanwhile, a new narrative blossoms in public discourse. Barty Crouch Jr. becomes a convenient morality tale. The villain every society needs to prove its moral hygiene. Children's textbooks call him the lesson of false loyalty. Magical history lectures summarize him in a single sentence. Brilliant but misguided, his downfall warns us that deceit cannot sustain greatness. It's comforting, symmetrical, and utterly wrong. You shake your head. Truth never survives the translation into curriculum, but it sells well. Parents nod approvingly, teachers underline the moral, and the ministry smiles through yet another press release. Scholars still debate whether the sanitization was deliberate or instinctive, but you know better. Institutions, like people, protect their egos first. Dumbledore receives an official letter asking him to endorse the revised historical narrative. He doesn't. Instead, he files it under philosophical correspondence and forgets to reply. In private, he tells McGonagall that truth is like dragon fire, beautiful, uncontrollable, and best handled sparingly. She rolls her eyes, mutters something about riddles, and goes back to grading essays. Even among allies, fatigue replaces outrage. That's the tragedy of normalization. The extraordinary becomes administrative. Outside the ministry, smaller publications try to resist the tide. The Wizarding Independent runs an op-ed titled, "What Really Happened to Barty Crouch Jr." It lasts 2 print cycles before being accused of undermining public confidence. You chuckle softly. Censorship has always worn the robes of reassurance. A mainstream historical parallel slips into place. During the Cold War, governments routinely buried inconvenient intelligence failures beneath patriotic rhetoric. The wizarding world simply skipped the technology and went straight for the sentiment. In the cafeteria, Junior aurors gossip between sips of lukewarm coffee. "Did you hear?" one whispers. "They found Crouch's personal notes?" Another shrugs. "They'll be redacted, mate. Probably turned into a training manual by next term." He's right, of course. The notes, a mess of paranoia and philosophy, are quietly repurposed into a new course titled Advanced Magical Counter-Deception. Students will one day study the techniques of the man they're forbidden to name. You smile. It's the educational equivalent of hiding vegetables in dessert. Then comes the memorial, small, tasteful, and deeply misleading. The ministry invites surviving staff from Hogwarts to a ceremony honoring those who upheld vigilance. There are speeches, applause, and an uncomfortable moment when Fudge mispronounces Crouch. You stand in the back, half amused, half melancholic, watching the crowd's expressions shift between relief and boredom. This is closure, institutional style, not understanding, but forgetting efficiently. The ceremony ends with a toast to continued harmony, and the applause echoes like paper tearing. Still, a few stubborn voices remain. A group of historians, self-styled the Revisionist Guild, publish a thesis arguing that Barty Crouch Jr. was a symptom, not a cause. Their paper includes words like systemic oversight, psychological displacement, and paternal authoritarianism, which guarantees no one in government reads it. You find yourself reading it twice, though, tracing each sentence like a charm of remembrance. One line stands out: "When we erase villains too quickly, we lose the vocabulary to recognize them next time." You whisper it under your breath. It sounds like prophecy disguised as academic prose. Weeks fade into months, and the story calcifies. The Crouch scandal becomes folklore. watered down, rhymed, and occasionally sung at pubs by drunk warlocks who can't remember the verses. Children play a game called Spot the Imposter, pretending to brew polyjuice with pumpkin juice and gossip. Somewhere, you imagine Barty laughing, delighted that even sanitized infamy grants a kind of immortality. A historian once remarked that infamy is just fame with better lighting. You think he would have approved. And then, just when you assume the ministry has finished polishing the past, a new regulation appears. The Magical Education Integrity Act. It mandates background checks, psychological screening, and something called pedagogical purity certification. The irony is unbearable. They've institutionalized paranoia. The wizarding world now lives under the motto, trust, but verify with veritaserum. You laugh quietly. It's exactly what Barty taught them. The imposter becomes the template. Scholars will later label this paradox the Crouch feedback loop. Even in disgrace, his influence shapes policy, proof that fear is the most renewable resource in governance. Toward the year's end, you visit the archives again. The file marked Crouch Jr. Bartemius has been moved, down 2 floors, into the Historical Curiosities section. The label reads simply, Resolved Matter. You brush dust off the cover and feel the faint hum of wards around it, as if the parchment itself resents containment. For a moment, you imagine it whispering, I'm still here, and perhaps it is. History never dies, it just changes handwriting. You step out into the atrium where the banner still hangs, slightly faded now. Rebuilding trust through transparency. The irony feels heavier than before, but also strangely comforting. You've learned to appreciate the rhythm of human self-deception. It's predictable, almost melodic. The fountain gurgles cheerfully, as though cleansing the world of memory 1 coin at a time. You toss in a kunut anyway, half prayer, half sarcasm, and whisper, may we never learn too quickly. Because learning, you realize, might actually break the cycle, and then what would the historians write about? As you leave the building, sunlight slants through the glass ceiling, refracting into 1,000 pale reflections. For a moment, it looks like the world has been rewritten in gold ink. You smile softly. The ministry has done its job. The scandal is history, the villain is myth, and peace, thin, glittering, temporary peace, has returned. The story officially is over. But you know better. Every cover-up is just a preface waiting for its sequel. You return to Hogwarts years later, drawn by something quieter than nostalgia, but heavier than curiosity. The castle hasn't changed much. Stone rarely does. But the energy feels different now, warmer at the edges, less haunted by denial. The great oak doors open as if they still remember you, sighing in that old way that only wood and memory can. You walk through corridors lined with portraits of new professors and a few familiar ghosts who pretend not to recognize you. The air smells of wax and parchment again, though faint traces of old fear still linger like smoke after a candle's been blown out. History may have been rewritten, but it hasn't been erased. It just hums under the surface like a forgotten charm. Inside a newly refurbished Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, a teacher demonstrates shield charms with theatrical flair. Students laugh as a misfired hex sets a desk aflame. The fire vanishes instantly with a wave and applause. On the blackboard, written in neat cursive, is the phrase, "Preparedness is peace." You smile. It's basically constant vigilance with better PR. Scholars would call that semantic rebranding, but you just call it irony wearing a bow tie. Somewhere, Barty Crouch Jr. is probably rolling in whatever unmarked metaphysical space villains are assigned after administrative handling. Yet you can't deny it. His influence lingers. Every student in that room knows the story of the imposter professor, even if they've forgotten the name. His cautionary tale has become a kind of educational folklore, half warning, half myth, retold with enough embellishment to make it palatable. The ministry calls this progress. You call it repackaged paranoia. As you stroll down to the courtyard, you overhear 2 young wizards arguing over the historical details. He was just misunderstood, one insists. The other shakes his head. Nah, he was completely mad. You grin, there it is, the eternal academic divide condensed into teenage debate. In fact, whole conferences now exist to discuss Barty's psychology. Papers with titles like The Pedagogical Pathologies of Power and Imposture as Identity, a post-Voldemort reading circulate among historians who never met a metaphor they couldn't invoice. You've read a few, of course. The arguments range from tragic determinism to performance theory. One professor even suggests that Barty's year as Moody inadvertently improved Hogwarts' safety standards. He taught students how to think like danger, she writes. The footnotes are longer than the thesis, but you appreciate the optimism. Scholars still debate whether unintended consequences count as legacy or accident. A mainstream historical fact drifts in as you pass under the clock tower. After World War II, Allied militaries kept certain enemy strategies for future defense. It was called Operation Paperclip, a polite name for absorbing what once horrified you. The wizarding world, it seems, has performed its own version. The vigilance curriculum that now shapes Auror training borrows directly from Barty's methods: constant observation, psychological profiling, even controlled exposure to simulated curses. Officially, it's all in the name of safety. Unofficially, it's proof that fear is the best teacher when dressed in academic robes. You let out a low chuckle. The irony could power an entire flu network. A new generation of Aurors graduates under a program titled the Crouch Doctrine, though, naturally, the name is said to honor the father, not the son. The distinction is bureaucratically tidy but philosophically useless. Every policy memo echoes the same mantra. Trust is earned through verification. You can't decide whether it's tragic or genius. Even the badges have changed. They now include a small rune that glows blue when detecting deception. It's marketed as progress, though one Auror jokes, mostly it lights up around my mother. You laugh softly. Somewhere between tragedy and absurdity, vigilance has turned into lifestyle branding. You visit the library next, because that's where truth likes to nap. The restricted section hums faintly, as if gossiping about the books that got away. On a high shelf, you find a dusty volume titled The Polyjuice Paradox: Identity and Moral Transmutation. Inside, a handwritten note tucked between the pages reads, "Teach them, but make them question." No signature. You stand there for a moment, the silence thick with possibility. Maybe it's an old professor's reminder. Or maybe the castle itself is conspiring to keep the conversation alive. Either way, the sentiment feels right. After all, the true legacy of deceit isn't paranoia. It's curiosity sharpened into vigilance. Outside, students play on the lawn where dueling once stirred the air with fear. They laugh freely now, and you find comfort in that sound. Yet part of you wonders if they're too comfortable, if the pendulum has swung too far toward complacency again. That's the cycle, isn't it? Every generation inherits someone else's caution and slowly forgets why it mattered. Historians call it the fatigue of remembrance. You've seen it before. After revolutions, pandemics, wars, people rebuild their faith in normalcy faster than they rebuild walls. Maybe that's not weakness. Maybe it's survival. You smile. Even idealism needs a nap sometimes. The wizarding journals continue to romanticize Barty's fall, painting him as either a Shakespearean anti-hero or a walking caution sign. The truth lies somewhere inconveniently between. A fringe tidbit surfaces from one of those journals, a rumor that the enchanted trunk he used to imprison the real Moody was never destroyed but stored deep in the Department of Mysteries. Supposedly, it hums occasionally, as though remembering. The unspeakables deny everything, of course, which is precisely what makes it believable. You can't resist laughing softly. Wizards never met a haunting they didn't accidentally preserve. In the years since, the Crouch name has become a cultural shorthand. Politicians warn against another Crouch moment when they mean we really don't want to get caught. Playwrights stage tragedies titled The Father and the Fraud, complete with thunder effects and exaggerated accents. There's even a folk ballad now, a haunting melody sung by school choirs around Halloween. The lyrics are ridiculous, rhyming potion with notion, but the chorus lands beautifully. Beware the face that wears your trust. You have to admit it's catchy. History, it seems, always finds its rhythm in rhyme. You sit on a bench overlooking the black lake as dusk settles. The water mirrors the pink-orange sky, still and deliberate. A pair of students practice disarming spells nearby, laughing each time they succeed. You watch them for a while, realizing that they've inherited both safety and suspicion in equal measure. They'll grow up believing that vigilance is virtue, that doubt is wisdom. Maybe that's not such a bad inheritance. Scholars argue whether Barty's legacy is one of corruption or caution, but you think it's simpler. He made the world slightly harder to fool. It's a low bar, but it's progress. Still, as you rise to leave, the thought lingers that vigilance has a cost. Constant watchfulness breeds exhaustion, and exhaustion breeds blindness of its own kind. You wonder if the next generation will recognize that balance, the line between awareness and obsession, protection and paranoia. Even now in quiet hallways you can hear echoes of both extremes whispering to each other. One says never again, the other says never trust. The difference between them is a heartbeat. As night deepens, you wander past the gates, glancing back at the towers glowing softly against the sky. The castle looks peaceful, maybe even wise. You exhale slowly, thinking of all the lessons carved invisibly into its stones. The Crouch story isn't carved in marble, but it lives in habits, in how professors glance twice before trusting a report, in how students question authority a bit more boldly. That, you think, is legacy, not statues or slogans, but the subtle shift in how people think when no one's watching. Somewhere behind you, the wind carries a faint whisper. It might be imagination, or it might be the castle sighing, constant vigilance, one last time before sleep. You chuckle softly and turn toward the path leading back to the world that never stops rewriting itself. The night is calm, the stars indifferent, and for the first time in a long while, you feel something resembling peace. It's not the peace of forgetting, it's the gentler kind, the peace of understanding that even imperfect stories matter. And in that thought, you realize vigilance isn't about fear. It's about memory, refusing to die quietly. You return one last time, years after the headlines have faded, after the conferences have moved on to more fashionable tragedies. The road to Hogwarts is quieter now, lined with moss and memory. The wind rolls softly through the trees, carrying with it the smell of parchment and rain. You walk slowly, no longer searching for meaning, just presence. It's evening, the hour when history exhales. The castle waits ahead like a patient witness, its windows flickering gold against the gathering dusk. Every stone hums faintly, as if reciting the stories it has absorbed. You pass through the gate and realize that time hasn't erased Barty Crouch Jr. It has simply folded him into the architecture, like a hidden note between the pages of an old book. The new generation of students doesn't remember the details, not really. They've heard of the Crouch Year as one hears of a ghost tale, half warning, half entertainment. Their laughter bounces off the corridors where fear once walked, and you find that comforting. Forgetting, it turns out, is a form of survival. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the castle grows still, a few students swear they hear footsteps echoing in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, slow and deliberate, as if pacing between memory and guilt. The professors dismiss it as imagination. You, however, recognize the rhythm. Some lessons refuse to end when the bell rings. A few of the old portraits remember too. They speak of the imposter with cautious fascination, not quite sympathy, but something adjacent. He was thorough, mutters a former headmistress. Terribly misguided, adds another. But he had style. You smile. Even the dead appreciate competence. The truth is, the story of Barty Crouch Jr. has settled into that peculiar historical limbo, too important to ignore, too uncomfortable to glorify. It exists now in footnotes, essays, and the occasional late-night debate about ethics over butterbeer. That's how legends survive in the real world, not as monuments, but as questions no one fully answers. You wander toward the courtyard fountain, where the water glimmers beneath the moonlight. Someone has left a small wreath there, wildflowers bound by a ribbon, simple, anonymous. You suspect it's from a student who stumbled across the old records. Maybe one who saw a bit of themselves in the lonely ambition of the man they were told to hate. Every generation finds its reflection in someone it shouldn't. You remember reading a study once. Scholars found that students who researched historical villains often reported empathic dissonance, a discomfort born from understanding too much. You chuckle softly. Empathy is the most dangerous form of curiosity. The ministry, of course, has long since moved on. The Educational Integrity Office merged with another department, then quietly dissolved. Security measures loosened, slogans changed, and the word vigilance fell out of fashion. People began talking about trust again, as if they had rediscovered it in a drawer. It's the same pattern history follows every time. Build walls, grow tired of the shadows they cast, tear them down, and start again. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. After the French Revolution, Paris banned public executions to restore civility. Yet crowds still gathered near the scaffold's former site, whispering the names of those who fell. Memory, apparently, enjoys haunting polite society. The Wizarding World now tells the Crouch story as cautionary folklore. There's even a traveling exhibit, The Faces of Deception, a century of magical imposture, where a wax figure of the false professor stands beside plaques about ethics and duty. The recorded narration calls him a tragic product of divided loyalty. You nearly laugh out loud when you hear it. If euphemism were an Olympic sport, the ministry would never lose. Still, you linger longer than you intend to. The wax eyes are unblinking, the expression eerily serene, as though he finally found peace in someone else's simplification. Yet the real legacy isn't in museums. It's in the way people pause before certainty, in how teachers double-check their own notes before lectures, in how aurors hesitate a second longer before trusting a tip too convenient to be true. Paranoia has softened into mindfulness, vigilance into habit. You stand in the courtyard again, watching the lamplight ripple across puddles, and realize that the world has learned, not perfectly, but enough. Scholars might frame it differently, with charts and citations, but you see it simply. Tragedy translated into wisdom, one generation at a time. A fringe tidbit from an old magical psychology paper surfaces in your thoughts. It claimed that guilt can linger in objects, binding itself to patterns of repetition. You glance at the castle windows, glowing faintly against the dark, and wonder if that's why Hogwarts keeps repeating history in new disguises. Maybe it's not cursed. Maybe it's just honest. Every age believes its fears are unique, but they're not. They're inherited, rehearsed, and renamed. And perhaps that's comforting. It means even our mistakes have lineage. The night deepens. The stars emerge one by one, shy and deliberate. You find yourself walking down to the edge of the Black Lake. The water is still, black as ink, the moon breaking itself across the surface like a confession whispered too late. You sit on a rock and listen. To wind, to waves, to memory. It's easy to imagine Barty here once, pacing and plodding under the same indifferent sky. Maybe he believed he was destined for greatness. Maybe he just wanted someone to see him. That's the quiet cruelty of ambition. It always begins as a plea to be noticed. Somewhere far behind you, an owl calls, and the sound ripples across the lake like punctuation. You think of Dumbledore's old words. We've lost the memory of how we got here. But maybe that's the point. History doesn't need to be remembered perfectly. It just needs to echo enough to be felt. You close your eyes and let the cool night seep in. The world is still flawed, still fragile, still building castles on the ruins of its own certainty, but it endures. And that endurance, quiet and unheroic, feels like magic itself. You stand, brushing off the damp stone, and glance once more toward the castle. Its towers gleam softly under moonlight, ancient yet alive, still humming with the stories it refuses to forget. Somewhere inside, a new student will soon open a dusty book and read the sanitized version of events. Maybe they'll feel that same twinge of curiosity, that itch to look deeper. Maybe that's all legacy really is, a chain of wondering minds, passing the same questions forward in slightly different words. You smile. Even deceit can leave behind wisdom if someone bothers to listen carefully enough. Now the wind picks up, cool and steady, carrying the scent of rain. You pull your cloak tighter, but the chill feels gentle, almost kind. It whispers around the courtyard stones, through the arches and up toward the towers, as though the castle itself is speaking softly to the night. Perhaps it's gratitude, perhaps it's warning. You can't tell the difference anymore. You just know it's time to go. You take one last look, one last breath, and whisper your own small farewell to the man who pretended too well, to the world that learned too slowly, to the history that keeps trying anyway. And as you walk away, the castle fades behind you, its lights flickering like closing eyes. The path ahead glows faintly under the moon, the world settling into silence. The story ends not with judgment or triumph, but with stillness, the kind that invites sleep, reflection, and maybe forgiveness. The air softens as you step beyond the gates, and the sound of the forest folds itself into the hush of distant water. Everything feels slower now, the clouds drifting like ink stains, the grass bending in rhythm with your breath. You think about the stories that brought you here, the voices, the echoes, the questions that never found their answers, and realize they no longer need to. Not every truth demands closure, some simply rest. The moon hangs low and full, pale as memory, and the stars blink like quiet witnesses. Somewhere far behind you, Hogwarts sleeps, its dreams tangled with centuries. The torches dim, the halls grow still, and the past curls itself neatly into tomorrow's lessons. You walk on until the sound of the wind replaces thought, until the only thing left is peace, the quiet kind, shaped by understanding and lit by forgiveness. And when the last trace of the castle fades into the mist, you let go of the story at last, knowing it will keep whispering beneath the stone long after you're gone.